Okay, now we're going to look at the last chapter in this semester, and we're looking at the family beleaguered. This is when families they come up with some problems. So when we think about social problems and when family comes up with these difficulties, we need to determine who determines what a problem is. And what we're going to look at here is that when the public decides what a problem, why the public decides what the problem is, the subject is to change over time, and some individuals are not felt to deserve so much protection as other people. Um, Many groups make up public and often have competing interests. You know, whether it's a group with a social issue, whether it's the poor, the homeless, or First Nations issues. So each has, competing interests sometimes. And with the most powerful groups having vested interests, since they have a stake in keeping society as it is. And oftentimes these are richer, more corporate focused individuals. What is a family problem changes over time, and that's what was once accepted as normal can today be seen as a family problem. Things like homosexuality, spanking, or other and even worse things that were one time accepted as being the way they were have since changed, and that perspective about what is a problem has changed. So when we think about vested interests, the rich and powerful may not agree that their tax dollars going to people who they think should just pull up their own socks rather than seeing the long-term costs to people continually being disadvantaged and needing support longer, healthcare costs and housing supports. And so what's in place is what's called gatekeepers. And gatekeepers, this is a term that's not an official term as a job title so much as within a social system there are certain roles and responsibilities, jobs if you will, individuals recognized as having special expertise in identifying social problems and who controls access to important people or services. In Canadian society, some gatekeepers would be described as doctors, who is sick and who's not sick, therefore who gets access to services, police officers, who's abiding by the law, who's not, judges, social workers. Not everyone in society defines problems in the same way. So when special interests of two groups are similar, they often will work together to force change. Now what we're going to be using in this chapter is an ABCEX model. And an ABCEX model explains how families respond to stressors based on resources that they have and how they perceive the stressor. So just as some people will perceive having 5 kids in a family as a stressor, others adapt to it differently and see it less as a problem. And so this model looks at how individual families as well as collectively might see different stressors and whether they have what's required, resources needed to deal with that stressor. And so Reuben Hill, he proposed that this model that he calls ABCEX looks at A, B, C, and X. A refers to the stressor event, and this could be, as we mentioned in the last chapter, the person who's responsible for the income coming into the family loses a job. That causes a stress on a family. The B refers to the impact that stressor has on family resources. Well, how much savings does the family have? They have to reevaluate, well, who's more employable and what jobs could be available, and do they have any insurance, and what supports do they have to protect the family over this period of time while they have no income coming in? Are there services that they can make available? Now, some people are more able to meet that crisis better than others, depending upon the resources they have available to them. So C then refers to the way the family members view the stressing event. So some people will view themselves as victims, or as some would view it as an opportunity or as a challenge. Others might blame people or circumstances for the situation they find themselves in. Depending on how they perceive it will have a big impact on how they deal with it. And then the X, this refers to the crisis that follows. And that crisis could be this longer-term period without a job, or it might be the resolving of the issue of a lost job with finding another job or taking steps in a direction that finds income to help the family in the short term. Solutions may be functional, and solutions might be dysfunctional. They may increase the family's ability to solve the problem, that will be functional, and they may temporarily reduce the family's tensions but create new problems in the future, and that would be dysfunctional. And we'll come back to this model in a minute. If we were to look at the double ABCEX model, and the family crisis evolves over time, so pressure from various sources can accumulate. The double ABCEX model points to 5 stressors. And in particular, what they're focusing on is the initial stressor and its hardships. What are normative stressors? These are things that families normally deal with and are seen as being things that most families can deal with and are capable of. Then there's strains that begin before the particular stressor and efforts in the family to cope. Now the difficulty with this can be ambiguity. The situation within the family or within society may not be really clear. So what you're seeing is ABC just as in the previous model, with the X being the crisis. Now what affects all of the outcome of this will be, are there other pileups? So we've lost a job, but we've also have a child who has medical conditions and a family member older who we're now looking after. So these pileups of demands on this family are significant. Then the B part of these post-crisis would be adaptive resources. Now, what do they have in their tool belt of resources that are going to help them not only with the existing demands they already have, but this new stressor? Then the C would be this, how do we perceive these additional demands on our existing demands? And do we have a way of looking at this in a manner that allows us to continue to move on in a successful manner? And then, of course, we move into how do we adapt to this? Now, if I don't adapt very positively, I might turn to alcohol or drug abuse to dull the discomfort and deal with the stress. Well, of course, that has a long-term negative effect for both me and my family as well. I might choose a more positive approach in accessing the resources in my community, my neighbors, my friends, as a way of helping to cope with some of these responsibilities and issues. So it's just a model by which to look at how might different families deal with things. Now, one of the key ingredients to any family, whether they're dealing with a lot of demands or just a few, is this topic of resilience. And recently, researchers have focused on the family's ability to do well in the face of adversity. Resilience does not mean making the best of a bad situation. It involves change, sometimes drastic change, to produce a stronger and healthier adaptation. Now, there's 7 resiliencies developed in a struggle with family challenges, and they're really represented here. Insight, this is asking tough questions and giving honest answers. Within a family, it's important to have open and honest communication. It's one of the topics I'll touch on towards the end here. And insight enables us to use our open and honest communication to ask the tough questions. What do we have to give up? What are the tough things we might need to do in order to have long-term success? And then what would be those honest answers we need to give ourselves? We need to acknowledge that we're not prepared to deal with everything, and we have to drop something. Independence, distancing oneself emotionally and physically from the source of trouble in one's life. This is difficult, but independence is about seeing the problem at a distance and trying not to feel the emotion of that problem. Try to separate ourselves from it and be able to make a more rational decision rather than an emotional one. Relationships, making fulfilling connections with other people. Rather than turning into ourselves and avoiding other people, it's reaching out and connecting with people and looking for the supports that they're able to provide us in some of their ideas. Initiative, taking charge of the problem. Not to blame others, but to see what it is within this problem that we can deal with ourselves and take steps to reduce our own stressors. This is all, contributing to resilience, the ability to resist that which is impinging on us and to make adaptive changes. Creativity, using imagination and expressing oneself in art forms. It can include strictly finding things to do that stimulate and nurture yourself, but it's also using creative and imaginative ideas to resolve difficult problems. Humor, being able to find the comic in the tragic. Sometimes it can enable us to view problems in a different light and not to lose sight of the fact that this problem doesn't have to overwhelm us entirely. Humor is one way to deal with that. And then morality, acting on the basis of conscience rather than self-interest or practical consideration. Doing the right thing in spite of the difficulty that exists in front of us. So resilience is critical to a family's effective ability to deal with crisis, and every family will go through some degree of crisis within their family life and their family cycle. Some specific problems that families can and often will deal with. Illness itself is a continuing stress, especially if there's an unpredictable episode. Somebody is in an accident and has a serious physical issue to deal with. If it's progressive, is the prognosis uncertain? In 2006, 14.3% of Canadians had some sort of disability. Developmental delays are the most common among young children. Mobility and memory problems are often most common with older adults. Chronic illness, disability usually starts in one or two ways. Either it's sudden, over a period of time, or over a period of time. So it's either a chronic or acute. The illness becomes chronic stressors in the as stressors in the family pile up. Family social activities may change. Added to these stressors are normative family changes that are expected as part of any family cycle. As children get older, their responsibilities are getting more significant, their independence grows. These are normative stressors, and these are part of normal family cycle. Puberty, growing independent as young people, finding a mate, having children, retiring, these are all part of normative family changes. Chronic illnesses have a different effect, depending on the stage of family life cycle of either parents or children. The family coping patterns emerge that can be either functional or dysfunctional. Again, dysfunctional coping would be overprotection of the ill or disabled member, denial of the reality of the illness, anger and resentment toward the ill person. Functional coping helps families feel in control, trying to understand the medical situation through communicating with others like themselves and medical personnel, emphasize family cooperation and access to social support. Now, certainly for some people in families, alcoholism can be a problem. Acceptance of alcohol use varies among different cultures. The economic impact of alcohol-related harm in Canada is estimated to be $14.6 billion per year. The personal and social costs, well, illness, an inability to fulfill family and work responsibilities, premature death, fetal alcohol syndrome, the list goes on. Alcohol substance abuse is defined by society, so every culture is a little different. In 2009, 76.5% of Canadians reported drinking drinking in the past 12 months. Entire family, not just individuals, are involved when there's one alcoholic member. So back to this model again, when we're looking at alcohol abuse and looking at this model, alcoholism has a number of factors similar to chronic illness as well as differences. In alcoholic families, enablers allow individuals to continue to drink without suffering most extreme consequences. Family members also can be codependents, lack of personal boundaries, and taking on the drinker's problems finds meaning in and worth in caretaking, believes that he or she is responsible for whatever happens to the drinker, at risk of developing stress-related illnesses. Alcoholism can have a profound effect on marriage relationship. Communication can be affected. Alcoholics have a reduced ability to read nonverbal facial cues to emotions. An inability during drinking bouts to may alternate between excessive kindness during sober spells and anger can escalate into violence. So if you're looking at the ABC, A could be a lot of financial problems, a court case coming up, ambiguity, children becoming teenagers, and so you get a piling up of these issues from an accident that you've had. B, well, what kind of resources? Well, we have community services, there's friends, extended family, strength of family members, and then there's perception. No one must know. We have to keep this a secret. The family is, what your family is like, this can't go on. And so either you adapt by stopping drinking, attending AA, going to therapy or whatever, or you maladaptively adapt. You have a co-alcoholic, somebody who doesn't necessarily drink with you, but protects your drinking behavior. And this can transmit over generations. Your children witness this experience and then could carry on that same practice in their own lives as they grow older. So when we look at specific problems related to the alcoholic family, members of an alcoholic family learn a number of lessons about family life. Alcohol is the center of family life. That alcohol can make things better, and that alcohol abuse is a family secret to be covered up. This pattern of coping has a cost to the non-alcoholic family members. It creates anxiety, depression, shame, anger. Children of alcoholic parents are more likely to display behavior problems themselves. Often alcoholism is not admitted until a decisive event makes denial impossible. When alcoholic members stop drinking, however, there may be a crisis of sobriety. The family still has its old patterns and has new ones to learn, and that does take time. So bottom line, when it comes to family problems, as a family encounters problems, they must find solutions if they are to cope. Families who can talk openly about their feelings and adapt to problems and provide valuable emotional and practical support to one another are the most positively affected, or can most positively affect their problems. Adapt relatively well to chronic illnesses and disabilities. Families with more effective problem-solving skills usually communicate clearly. And it's not an easy practice, but it is a practice that one can't get comfortable with the level of communication that they seem to have achieved. As soon as we start to become comfortable with what we think we've accomplished, we start to degrade the quality of our communication. And as time goes by without communicating openly, then the risk to communicate openly is made more difficult, and therefore what often happens is that families stop communicating. And when they need to, when there's a crisis, they've forgotten how, and it seems risky to do it. And so it is important that one starts communicating effectively, not to let it down, not to let it go. Reinforce the effectiveness and reinforce the positiveness that open communication has. All right, we are done this semester, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I have, and we'll look forward to maybe seeing each other in another class. Goodbye and good luck.